We're digging now to our very first story in this package because the Finance Minister, Ofori, Atta, has disclosed that the first $600 million IMF fund will be used to finance government programs. Well, this was revealed at a Ghana IMF joint press conference in Washington, D.C. earlier today after the IMF's approval of Ghana's $3 billion IMF deal yesterday. Well, according to the Bank of Ghana, the first tranche of $600 million will be received by Ghana tomorrow. While speaking at the press conference, the IMF mission head to Ghana, Stefan, Rudy, outlined improvement in revenue mobilization and support for fiscal adjustment as some of the objectives of this particular deal.
Ghana has been facing a severe economic and financial crisis with the debt burden assessed as unsustainable. More specifically, a combination of pre-existing vulnerabilities and external shocks such as the COVID-19 pandemic, Russia's war in Ukraine have resulted in acute financing pressures, depreciating cedi, declining international reserves, slowing economic activity and high inflation. In response to these difficult circumstances, the Ghanaian authorities have taken decisive steps. Just to give you a few examples, the 2023 budget and the associated revenue reforms were very important first steps towards putting public finances back on a sustainable track. To restore debt sustainability, the government has launched a comprehensive debt restructuring. And the Bank of Ghana has also taken decisive steps to control inflation, and these efforts are already paying off. These are all essential ingredients to address the current challenges and to boost Ghana's prospects going forward. Of course, help from the international community is also needed, and the IMF is playing its part. The $3 billion extended credit facility approved by our board yesterday will support the government's efforts to address this crisis and build the foundations for a better and more inclusive future for all Ghanaians. It will also help ease financing constraints, including by unlocking more funding from the rest of the international community. Ghana's economic program has three key objectives. The first one is to restore macroeconomic stability. The second one is to ensure that debt is put on a sustainable path. And the third one is to lay the foundations for stronger and more inclusive growth. To reach these objectives, several policy priorities have been laid out by the government. First, large and front-loaded measures to bring public finances back on a sustainable path. And this will be done by mobilizing more domestic revenue and by improving the efficiency of public spending. Importantly, and I want to emphasize that the program does and will continue to include efforts to protect the vulnerable. Just to give you a few examples, the 2023 budget has, for example, doubled the level of benefits for the existing targeted cash transfer program, the LEAP, the Living Empowerment Against Poverty program, and it has also boosted allocations towards the school feeding program. Second, to support fiscal adjustment and enhance resilience to shocks, ambitious structural reforms will be implemented in the areas of tax policy, revenue administration, public financial management, as well as reforms to address the weaknesses in the energy and the cocoa sectors. Third, and I already referred to that, steps are being taken to bring inflation under control. And the Bank of Ghana has been raising interest rates and has virtually eliminated monetary financing of the budget. A flexible exchange rate policy will also be implemented to help rebuild international reserves. Fourth, measures to preserve financial stability are very central to the program. And last but not least, the government will also be implementing reforms to encourage private investment, higher growth and job creation.
Well, Finance Minister Ofori Atta disclosed that the $600 million used to finance government programs would be accounted for.
As you know, we are running a budget deficit. We are also agreeing for zero financing for that. So to continue to support the programs that we have is where the $600 million will be deployed. I think going forward, the issue of efficiency of government and efficiency of services to the people are going to be key, and therefore finding ways of ensuring that we're efficient in our deployment that we have. So that's going to be key. I think for all of us in Ghana to really internalize that there's a new era with regards to our own behavior, re-engineering, and the type of imports that we have, moving towards food security, so the importation of rice and poultry and tomatoes, etc., are brought down, and we produce those ourselves. That really will signal a new way forward that will increase the resilience and sustainability of the program.
Well, the Bank of Ghana, however, cautions government to use the deal to reset the financial sector.
I'll focus my brief remarks on three issues this afternoon. First, from the perspective of the central bank, and for that matter, the government of Ghana, the approved IMF support program should not be seen as about the money alone, that is the budget support that comes with the approval. While that helps with the current reserves profile for the central bank, what matters most is the fact that the program sets out a set of policy and structural reforms that should help Ghana to reset our economic policy fundamentals, which was dislodged by the crisis over the last year or so. These deep-seated reforms should re-anchor policy and embed irreversibility in our policy outcomes and ensure that buffers are rebuilt to make our economy more resilient. The second point follows from the first, that this is now the time to begin the work. The program approval is just the beginning of the real work of building Ghana better. And thirdly, the Executive Board's approval of the support program yesterday, especially if you look at the time frame within which Ghana secured this approval, is an indication of the strong government's political will and commitment to the reform agenda. The painful sacrifice of Ghanaians, especially through some of the measures such as the domestic debt exchange, which has also helped us reach these conclusions very quickly. So we have reached a point where our key stakeholders should come through very quickly with their support to give meaning to the catalytic role of the fund and help build Ghana better. We see here a clear demonstration of burden sharing, including macro and structural reforms and the domestic debt restructuring. We are looking forward to and continuing to count on an expedited process to conclude the remaining negotiations on external debt restructuring to ensure that Ghana quickly gets the full benefits and complements of these reforms to underpin the policy resetting agenda.
Well, the fund also expects that government will contain Ghana's wage bill by limiting hiring and wage increases, plus adjust utility tariffs throughout the year. Well, this is to compensate for any exchange rate and price movement to bring tariffs close to cost recovery levels. Well, these are part of a litany of measures the fund expects government to implement as part of efforts to meet the terms of the $3 billion program. Joy Business editor George Gyakye thankfully joins us in studio. You've been monitoring this from the very onset up until now. Let's talk about first the tariff adjustment and the issues that the IMF hopes that we would.
And Emefa, if you go through our documentations, you realize that there had already been an increment, and that was a prior action before we got our
so the latest one that we saw.
And the whole, if you go through the final document that has been issued about our program, the whole thing was that it appears we are not paying realistic tariffs. And there's been a built-up of a huge debt in the energy sector. And that is one of the reasons that is actually building up our debt, and that has forced our debt to unsustainable levels. So the argument is that going forward, take steps to deal with that arrears. There are huge power sector arrears. Take steps to deal with that and ensure that gradually we have realistic tariffs. Don't forget that even with the PRC itself, and if you look at the law, the plan was that every quarter we should have done a review.
Okay.
Depending on the current dynamics at that time. We have delayed, we've had the lack of political will, some would say, to take these tough measures. And those things are built up. But it appears that the program is insisting that do something about the situation. And I remember today we engaged Professor Atta Peter Korte, and he made an argument that when you look at the inputs or the variables that impact on the tariffs, there's an exchange rate effect, there's inflation as well, and then there's a cost of power generation. So if this program actually, it is going to help indirectly stabilize the Ghana cedi, and inflation will go down, and then it will also impact on crude purchase and all the rest. There could even be a reversal in terms of tariffs also going down, because if these variables are stable or they reduce, that could also impact on this whole tariff thing. But what is being done right now is to correct the previous inactions and gradually deal with the huge debts in the power sector.
Well, the issue about wage bill also came up. I know you've been also asking questions about the speedy process that we've seen in terms of arriving at where we are. We'll get to it, but let's talk about the wage bill. What exactly is the fund hoping that we will do?
If you go through the staff report, which contains our program, it is talking about more of like a freeze on employment and also a freeze in wage increment.
Okay.
And deal, because if you look at government budget and documentation, there's always this argument about the fact that our biggest challenge is the wage bill, and there are a lot of ghost names and others. So this program is also trying to push for a review of that space before you employ, before you increase wages, deal with the perceived ghost names and the wastage in that space before anything is done about it. So you're going to freeze increment, you're going to freeze bringing in new persons, and look at how you can deal with these issues gradually before. But you remember that in the 2015 program, there was still a clause in that said that, well, if, for instance, somebody is going on a retirement or an essential service, you can, but maybe that mass employment for some of the sectors, hold on first, because the whole idea is that there is a challenge in this space. So deal with that challenge
before you bring in more.
Aggravate that challenge.
Okay.
And that is what you get when you go through the program with respect to what is being done or what should be done when it comes to the wage bill.
Well, we'll get to talk about the reaction to this particular thing, because TUC Labour Front, they actually issued a warning ahead of us going to the IMF in terms of the freeze in employment amongst others. But this that's for another day. But let's talk about the joint press conference. I heard your question about the concerns that people have raised in terms of the speedy process comparing to what Chad and Zambia have been dealt with when it comes to the fund. You've been getting some reactions, some responses from the finance minister.
Interesting comment from the finance minister. And his argument was that when government has done a good work, we should find a necessary
should be praising.
And then, more of a pat on the shoulder about the work that has been done, than maybe entirely trying to be a cynic and also go through the program document and see the kind of work that has been done. But get back to the mission chief, Stefan Rudy. He believed that nothing was shelved or no waivers. They went through the mill to approve Ghana's program, and they don't see any setbacks going forward because the process was rushed. Because if we actually waived a lot of benchmarks to get this approval, then it will just come back to hit us again. But his assurance was that, listen, it went through the mill. We don't think that there could be any setbacks going forward.
So they insist that none of the steps or none of the processes were jumped for...
Maybe more of, let's say, unfavorably waived, because you remember there was a conditional staff agreement and we had to come back and make some corrections or meet some benchmarks and all the rest. There were some benchmarks that should have been done before the staff level agreement. Remember, there was a conditional staff level agreement, and then we came back to work on that. But again, engaging these staff officials in Washington, D.C., listen, you tried to push very hard Emefa, and the argument was that, listen, every benchmark that requires Ghana to get the program has been done. And that is why we are getting this $604 million, because those are for the benchmarks.
And that's it's in the account tomorrow.
The central bank's account. So those are for the benchmarks that were met as a precondition before the program. There is going to be a second tranche disbursement this year, and that one we should have the mission team in town in June to do their on-ground review that disbursement, the second tranche, will be tied to certain specific conditions. And I asked the mission chief again my question about what if Ghana fails on one condition? Would that affect the whole program? Well, he was trying to be a little bit more measured. It's like, we are convinced that, or we are optimistic that Ghana will meet all these measures. And
so this $600 million, George, that's hitting, I know that a question like that also came up as to what exactly this first tranche will be used for. Did we get a clear direction?
The minister made a statement, but I think that we may have to go through still the staff document.
Okay.
Because normally we know that the IMF disbursement directly has to go to the Bank of Ghana for balance of payment needs.
Okay.
Basically to support our imports and also support the currency. But also some would also argue that the dollars are going directly to the Bank of Ghana. The Bank of Ghana is not going to give the dollars to the central government, even when it comes to financing any government project. Normally, that money will hit Bank of Ghana.
And he gives that assurance at the press
when,
conference.
for instance, government needs to maybe, let's say, pay contractors who are executing maybe a Castle Road project, then the Bank of Ghana will issue a check, and then that will be used to pay for that project. So the Bank of Ghana might still hold on to that dollar cover that they need to support our currency. But maybe some further explanation whether there were conditions that it won't be 100% balance of payment support, but there could be some element of budget support for government.
And the conversation continues this evening on PM's First Business Edition. You're hosting the Minister of State in charge of Finance.
Yeah, that is Dr. Mohammed Amin Adam Asun. What next for government in terms of fiscal discipline and restoring investor confidence now that we've gotten the program approved and signed?
Promise me you're taking me to Washington the next time you're there. Okay, well, that's Joy Business editor George Gyakye there, giving us all the details when it comes to the IMF issues. I think it's time for us now to get into the election headquarters, and the minority side in Parliament is asking Ghanaians to be prepared for the shocks that will accompany the bailout secured from the International Monetary Fund. Well, according to the caucus, many of the conditionalities could have been avoided if government heeded their call to go to the fund earlier in 2022. Well, these are portions of the statements that has been issued by the minority. First, it says it's taking notice of a joint announcement by the IMF and the government of Ghana on the completion of processes leading to the IMF's executive board approval of Ghana's request for a fund-supported program. It goes on to say this comes after months of protracted negotiations with Ghana's International Creditors Committee, made up of the Paris Club and China, for financing assurances to pave way for the IMF's board consideration of Ghana's request. So it's cataloging, and it goes on to talk about Ghana's recent unilateral suspension of both domestic and external debt servicing, that led to a default on both our domestic and foreign debts for the first time in our lifetime. Well, this is far worse than the repudiation that occurred under General Ignatius Kutuwe Champoun's military regime. This has resulted in Ghana being downgraded by international rating agencies to restrictive default, the worst in our history. Then it says, we wish to state for the records that when the Ekufuado-Bawumia NPP government finally decided on 4th July 2022, that's 11 months ago, to seek an IMF bailout, we in the minority were clear in our minds that this government had long missed every golden opportunity they were presented with to salvage the economy, which they have so grossly mismanaged since coming into office in 2017. Then it says the minority has on countless occasions cautioned this government that the fruit of its crass mismanagement of Ghana's economy through wanton misuse of borrowed funds for consumption purposes had long crystallized into a crisis. We urged government to immediately seek the fund support long ago, a call that was flatly disregarded, it says. And then it says the Ekufuado-Bawumia NPP government's continuous denial over the true state of Ghana's economy and the strenuous attempts to shift responsibility and blame external factors have been clear from day one, despite all the manipulations of the data to hide the true state of the economy. So it goes on. We'll go on to the next point now. And it says, indeed, the vainglorious words of the finance minister, Ken Ofori in February 2022, when he was urged by the Ghanaian people to go to the IMF, still ring hollow to this day. And he's quoting the finance minister saying, I can say we are not going to the IMF. Whatever we do, we are not. Consequences are dire. We are a proud nation. We have the resources. We have the capacity. End quote. And then the tragic events that have preceded this announcement, including the debilitating domestic debt exchange program with its attendant cruel haircuts and denial of coupon payments to aged pensioners, negative impact on banks and insurance companies, the billions of Ghana cedis impairment, amongst others, did not therefore come to us as a surprise, it says. And we are on record to have urged this government to seek an IMF bailout in 2021. And we are talking about the Ethiopia disposition of the Akufo-Addo government arrogantly ignoring wise counsel. Point 10 of that statement says, we wish to commend the tolerance of Ghanaian bondholders who have taken haircuts on their investments and returns, the pensioners who have so far been denied payment of maturing coupons on their investments, and Ghanaians, both young and old, who have so far endured various painful sacrifices such as turbulent economy, rising cost of living, and anxiety over how to afford the basic needs of life. So it has point 11 as well, and it says, having secured a board approval, the Ghanaian people look forward to the board document on the true state of Ghana's economy in the coming days. This report will outline the full details of the bargain between the fund and Akufo-Addo in terms of our debt sustainability analysis, performance criteria, structural benchmarks, and the gamut of other conditionalities that have been agreed upon. So they await the details of this particular, agreement that we've had with the fund, and in the coming days also we'll continue to follow this particular issue for you and bring you hopefully in conjunction with Joy Business editor George Riafe. So it's time to actually get into the election headquarters now, and the National Democratic Congress has expressed its unwavering determination to reclaim their Senate seat in the forthcoming by-election following the Supreme Court's ruling that nullified Gyakye's eligibility in the 2020 poll. So in a statement, the NDC affirmed its full support for Mr. Kwesi, assuring him of the party's backing and the solidarity of the minority caucus in Parliament. So with an eye on an even more resounding victory, the NDC is eager to mobilize its resources and rally behind their candidate. Deputy General Secretary of the NDC, Mustafa Gbande, emphasized their preparedness for the electoral process, and he asked that they are eagerly awaiting the Electoral Commission to initiate the necessary processes.
The next process is that we are waiting for the Supreme Court's judgment to give us a fair appreciation and the basis of that judgment. Number two, we also want to know government schedule as far as that election is concerned. As indicated in the letter signed by my boss, we are prepared for the by-election. We are ready for the by-election, and as soon as possible, we believe that because of the urgency of what is happening in Parliament, government should move so that we can go and have that election. We, as a party, we are more than prepared for the by-election as a step 2. But step 1 would be for us to examine the judgment of the court and to advise ourselves as a party, and then from there.
Now, the Director of Legal Affairs of the NDC, Abraham Amaliba, says the party will insist that aspirants produce their certificate of renunciation before allowing them to run in any party elections going forward.
If in law, if it were negligence, we would say that they also contributed to the negligence. And so I expected that kind of that kind of proposal to the EC to scrutinize and then to know. And by now, the Supreme Court, whose laws require certification for renunciation, and those whose laws will say that, look, immediately you put in the application, is conclusive. There are some countries like that. Once you put in the application, you don't need to wait for a renunciation certificate. So I think yes, we need the EC to be more vigilant and know some of these laws that are coming from other countries about citizenship. Then also on our part, we have in the last election that just passed the primaries, we have indicated that those who renounce the citizenship before the nominations and that they lose the right to represent the party if they don't do that. And so we will not present them to the EC if they fail to renounce their citizenship. So we've done those things, and I think that going forward, we may not have some of these things happen.
While on the other hand, Chairman of Constitutional and Legal Committees for the NPP, Frank Davis, wants the Electoral Commission to undertake due diligence before allowing anyone to run in any elections. He also spoke on PM Express with Evan Spencer.
NPP, we went through the same process. I was the chairman of the verification committee. All the prospective parliamentary candidates who came before us, I demanded proof of the certificate of renunciation. If you don't have it, I will not pass.
That is, was that based on a prior suspicion?
Of course. I mean, the same thing happened to our own Adamu Sakandi.
Okay. Yeah.
So the questionnaire we had was that if you have renounced your citizenship, provide us with the certificate.
So you see that.
So from the threshold, we had confirmed and verified whatever documents our people brought. So I think going forward, the EC should not take any parliamentary candidate's word for granted. If you say you have renounced your citizenship, let us see the certificate
before they clear you
of renunciation, before you are clear.
Now, the Ghanaian legislature, who doubles as the member of the Legal Affairs Committee of Parliament, Emmanuel Kwesi-Bedzua, is raising serious questions about the outcome of Nigeria's presidential elections as lawmakers from across West Africa deliberate on the precarious democratic situation in the continent's most populous nation, that's Nigeria. Two opposition parties in the country, the Labour Party and the People's Democratic Party, PDP, are currently in court challenging the process. Well, Emmanuel Kwesi-Bedzua, who is also a member of the Human Rights Committee of ECOWAS Parliament, tells Joy News that their findings suggest that only 38% of the voter population participated in February's election, a development which is not healthy for the stability of Nigeria and has possible security implications for the sub-region. Blessed Suga has more from ECOWAS.
Well, so if you talk about why the ECOWAS Parliament is concerned about the political climate in Nigeria, the basic point is that Nigeria is the most populous nation, not just within the West Africa sub-region, but across Africa as well. Whatever happens to this country in terms of its democratic principles and the democratic tendency has the likelihood to impact countries such as Ghana and others in the West Africa sub-region. There may be a displacement of people if anything goes wrong with the democratic processes in this country. It's the reason for which the Legal Affairs Committee of the ECOWAS Parliament says they need to move in and to look at the early warning signals. For those of you who are not aware of the early warning signals, ECOWAS adopted an early warning mechanism a couple of years ago, actually, just aimed at ensuring that the views and sentiments of the ECOWAS population is adopted and part of the democratic or political situation going forward. If the climate becomes one that is filled with tension, then that early warning mechanism will be triggered just to allow for actors across West Africa to engage leaders and to engage the necessary stakeholders that will ensure that the political climate is calm and still. So it's the reason for which the deliberations are in fact underway from amongst the MPs themselves. Officially tomorrow the committee will have its seating, and once they have that seating, they will decide on what the way forward should be on the political climate in Nigeria. Mind you, the opposition political parties are asking for a rerun of the elections where they believe that the candidacy of Bola Ahmed Tinubu as the leader of the APC should be annulled. He should not be recognized as the president-elect. And these are matters that the opposition wants escalated to the West African body. They've been asking ECOWAS to ensure that all West African leaders boycott the swearing in, which is just up in a few days. So it's been a very charged atmosphere here in Nigeria.
That's my colleague Blessed Sugan reporting live from Abuja. We know also that the Court of Appeal in Nigeria will on Friday decide on an application brought before it by the largest opposition, People's Democratic Party, asking for a live telecast of the proceedings. Well, the party is also asking the court to annul Nigeria's February polls and says it will be in the interest of citizens to follow how justice is being dispensed on a crucial matter such as the outcome of a presidential election. Let's head on to Zoom now and bring in Dr. Daniel Bwala. It's a member of the Atiku presidential campaign legal team. Thank you so much for joining us all the way from Nigeria. We appreciate your time. So first off, let me take a look at or walk us through the demands that you are making. We'll talk about that live telecast demand and what the outcome has been. But first, the substantive issues that you're raising before the court.
Well, thank you for having me and good evening to viewers. Essentially, we are in court to challenge the declaration by INEC that Bola Ahmed Tinubu is the winner. The laws in Nigeria that govern such is the Electoral Act, and in Section 134, you find 4 grounds for which anybody who is challenging the election will come. Number 1 is under qualification, that the person who was declared as the winner was at the time of election not qualified. And then the second one, that the election is marked with irregularity and corruption. The third one is that there is non-compliance with the provisions of the Electoral Act. And then the fourth one, there is a substantial non-compliance. Now, when I see reporting, it is not just about the substance of proving that we scored the majority of the lawful vote, but when you look at disqualification or qualification under Section 134, you see that there are scenarios where this election, when it is annulled, or rather when Bola Ahmed Tinubu is disqualified, then Atiku will be returned as the winner of that election. So some of the grounds that we have been quote challenging it is that the vice presidential candidate, who is now the vice president-elect, was at the time of the primaries, he had this double nomination. He hadn't given up the Senate seat when he took up the vice president, and our law says the person stands disqualified. Then also there are Supreme Court decision that says once any of the parties is disqualified, it affects the entire ticket. So if you disqualify them on that ground, then that means the vote casted to them will be considered in law as wasted vote. It means the person who came second becomes now the winner. That is the issue of his certificate that was issued to him by Chicago University, looking substantially different with the certificate of Chicago that he submitted to INEC. Then you also have other issues of the nationality he acquired of Guinea, the passport of Guinea and all of that. So you have a massive issues around that qualification. But there is an important point I need to make. In the election in which Bola Ahmed Tinubu was declared winner, he did not score 25% of the vote in the FCT, the Federal Capital. And Section 134 of the Constitution says that anybody who will be declared as a winner, after he has taken the 2/3, after he has scored, the 2/3 majority of the vote, he must have the FCT, 25% in the FCT. So Section 134 now is brought to the court for interpretation. If the court holds the view that that provision is sacrosanct, then that means what the court will do is to annul the election and then call for a runoff. So all of these things are part of the issues that we have brought to the court in a substantive way.
But generally, though, what would you say has been the response to this particular action that's been taken by the PDP?
Well, as of now, it is difficult to predict. What we know is that we have confidence in the judicial system in Nigeria. I know a lot of Nigerians, a majority of Nigerians do not have that confidence because over the years, you saw how matters are brought to the court and then they didn't meet the expectation of people. But that's why we brought this application to the court asking for that live coverage, because we felt that live coverage would enable our people to develop the confidence that is required in this adjudication.
But Dr. Bwala, if you have such confidence in the judicial process and the system as a party, then why are you asking for a live telecast is the concern and the question that I was going to pose to you, because if you are confident in them, why do you need the process telecast?
Because the adjudication is not just about us who are in court as legal team, it's about the Nigerian people who cast their votes. So it's about the people. If you look at our constitution, it's about the people. The very concept of democracy is government of the people, for the people, and by the people. So whatever you do, if it is not people-oriented, then it becomes an issue of question. And because the Nigerian people, majority of them say they do not have that faith, if you're able to grant that live telecast, they will see for themselves and judge for themselves. I'll give you a scenario where if the media is manipulated, the reportage or the reporting of court proceedings might be different from the actual thing that happens in the court. But if you have a live telecast, it means the man in the village Wherever you are, anywhere in the world, you would have viewed for yourself the proceedings in court and draw your own deduction. It's all about accountability.
And what has been the response? We are getting the Court of Appeal to decide on this matter tomorrow. Is that the case?
Right. So we have the application. Labour Party have similar applications. So when we were in court today deliberating that the ruling party, the APC, the Council for APC, they were of the view that both of these applications should be taken tomorrow and not today.
Okay.
But we insisted that we have our separate petitions and the court should listen to us. The court can decide to take our applications today, and then tomorrow, after taking the applications of Labour, they can give the ruling. And I think the court agreed with us. So tomorrow, there will be a ruling on that.
But the concern is also that, at least listening to what you're asking for, the reliefs you're seeking from the court, is not too different from what the Labour Party is also asking for. Why not run a joint case at this point when indeed both of you are seeking about the same thing?
That's a good point. But where the Labour Party candidate also is saying he won, there's no way you can have a joint petition.
Okay.
Because he is saying he won when we are saying we won. Now, we have the original copies, duplicate copies of the result in all the polling units. You know, what INEC did substantially that destroyed the confidence is that on the day of election, consistent with the provision of our law, they refused to upload to IREF real-time the result. Yeah. And that has always been the problem, that if people don't have a viewing portal where they can see, as that's happened in Ghana and some other places, it can be manipulated. So that's the reason why people believe that it was manipulated. And ultimately, when eventually INEC uploaded the result in the IREF as to today, if you go to IREF, the result in IREF is substantially different from what they announced.
Well, you made a call earlier to our president, for instance. At least yesterday, I interacted with Shomi and mentioned that presidents like Akufo-Addo and other presidents in parts of Africa who've been invited to this inauguration ceremony should boycott it. Have we now had any official communication of a sort? Have you had any responses so far since that call was made?
Well, to be honest with you, I am not aware that Atiku Abubakar as a person has made that call. But if Segun Shomi made the call personally on his own volition, then that is not an official call by Atiku Abubakar. What we know is that there is a law of the land. Until Tinubu, for example, is disqualified by the order of court, if that doesn't happen until 29, he will have to be sworn in because the constitution above happened. But for the purposes of ethics and then preserving democracy, I think that Africa needs to show example. Let me tell you our disappointment. During the process of this election, international observers came inclusive of African Union, ECOWAS, and then you have the Commonwealth, and then you have European Union and the rest. Apart from African Union and ECOWAS, that tried to curry favor of the government by saying, well, it is fair enough, all other observers adjudged that the election was marred with irregularity and it was far below international standards. So this sometimes is where you find the hypocrisy of Africa, where we fail to come together as one nation and prove to the world that we can hold ourselves to account and we can do what we think is right.
Okay, we'll get to interact again. Same time, I'm sure, tomorrow after the Court of Appeals decision. We are grateful for your time. That's Dr. Daniel Boyla, is a member Atiku Presidential Campaign's legal team, joining us all the way from Abuja. And you heard earlier also my colleague Blessed Suga there interacting with MPs from West Africa there also to monitor the situation. We're live in Abuja and we'll bring you all the details as it happens. Also on myjoyonline.com, you can read the details there. But the Ghana Boundary Commission is also tonight hinting at a possible reconstruction of some boundary pillars which played a crucial role in the 2017 ECOWAS ruling but are currently buried in the beach sand of the Western region. Speaking at the opening ceremony of a joint technical meeting in La Côte d'Ivoire, National Coordinator of the Ghana Boundary Commission, Major General Emmanuel Kotia, said the construction of a lighthouse in the previously disputed area with Côte d'Ivoire will also help align the common land boundary terminus, which serves as a guide for the maritime boundary between Ghana and La Côte d'Ivoire.
The main objective of the meeting in Grand Bassam, Côte d'Ivoire, is to continue discussions on the process of reaffirming the land boundary between Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire by replacing damaged boundary pillars. It is also for the implementation of the 2017 ruling by the International Tribunal of the Law of the Sea ECOWAS. ECOWAS in Hamburg, Germany in 2017 ruled in favor of Ghana in the maritime dispute with Cote d'Ivoire. The chamber, in a unanimous decision, ruled that there has not been any violation on the part of Ghana on Cote d'Ivoire's maritime boundary. It also noted that Ghana has not violated Cote d'Ivoire's sovereign rights with its oil exploration in the disputed basin. Speaking at the opening ceremony of the meeting, National Coordinator of the Ghana Boundary Commission, Major General Emmafa Apawu, urged the two commissions to consider the construction of the lighthouse in the area to align with the land boundary terminus, which serves as a guide for Ghana's maritime boundary.
Another priority is to adopt and possibly coordinate the reaffirmation of the land boundary terminus. That's pillar 54-55 on the Ghana side at Newtown. One thing we have realized is that the pillars, some of the pillars have been submerged by the sand. And let's remember that it is a land boundary terminus in that area that was used by ECOWAS ruling, and that is where the guiding, that is what guides us so far as our maritime boundary is concerned. We're hoping that this meeting will be able to set up a date as part of the plan of action to be able to go for an inspection of those pillars and decide on possible reconstruction of those pillars. Related to that, we should also be thinking of building a lighthouse in that area. That would serve, if we can jointly seek for funding, we'll put a lighthouse there that will align with the land boundary terminus. That will serve as a direction for ships and other activities so far as the maritime domain is concerned.
Major General Emmafa Apawu also warns the two boundary commissions to expedite work on the replacement of damaged pillars along the international boundary line between Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire in the Dollar Power area.
I will re-emphasize on some of the priority areas that we need to look at so far as the Ghanaian perspective is concerned. We think that as a matter of urgency, the two commissions should think of reaffirming the boundary area in Dollar Power as soon as possible in view of the situations both sides have identified.